I was thinking about something in the shower, and it seems my brain has been turned on to insight mode a little bit after the self-dialogue yesterday, and I haven't really thought of insights or written them down, but when they start coming to me in the shower, then I know the process has turned back on to some extent. And I was thinking a bit about evolution and how I feel like a lot of these things that happen in so-called bipolar disorder and maybe other things are the brain's attempt to mutate, not disintegrate and break down. But the trouble is there's not the right context in the environment of society for that mutation to take hold. So society is a bunch of words, and a person who goes through a so-called bipolar crisis gets in connection with a bunch of different words and meanings, and they're saying weird things and thinking weird things, so it's different words. And so those words don't align with the current words of society. But if that brain can, in a way, create context, create words that would provide the environment for the brain to go through this mutation or metamorphosis or complete the mutation, or maybe it's just the beginning of the process, really, who knows what it is, then maybe it could complete. In a way, back in the day when most of society was faith-based, those were the words, those were the memes, words of faith that we would repeat and believe. And then all of a sudden people would start coming with words of reason, and it would seem out there and not right and against the faith. And I feel the same thing's happening now, where something else is trying to be created that might be seemingly against reason or different from it for sure. So the words of reason don't match up with these new words of meaning. They don't seem correct according to that vantage point. But at some point, there would have been enough words of reason coming from enough brains that reason took its place. It didn't completely take over. There's still lots of people who are resting more in faith than in reason, and there's a place for everything. It's not really a hierarchy, but a holarchy. It's a different wholeness arising. And so I feel like perhaps when there's enough brains with words of meaning and making one's own meaning and context, it will create the environment for that to take its place. So right now, if I was just to be like, I have this brain disease called bipolar disorder, and it means I have mood swings, and I can't control it, and I take medication, end of story. Well, that's the story of reason, and that's the story of the science of the day. But that's not the story of my own inner science, my own inner experience. And I've spoken about that at length. And there was a guy who had a different theory of evolution named Lamarck, and he said that the environment is what creates the selective pressure for something to mutate. So the perception of the need for that trait is what creates the trait. And that goes along with what Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about with genetic engineering genes, and the environment is what actually creates the gene in the way, the perception of that. And we have to be able to see that we need that to some extent in order to create the genetic trait. And in that way too, the brain is mutating according to the needs. And somebody might say, well, I have a genetic predisposition to this disease, bipolar disorder. But in my mind, there could be a certain number of brains that have the propensity to mutate in this kind of environment where there's a pressure to mutate towards something more meaningful. And doesn't mean that it's a perfect process. It's actually quite chaotic to have all these people going into these altered states of consciousness. But there could be something that comes through stronger at some point. And I'm not really making this really clear because I just came upon it when I was in the shower and I didn't really want to write it down. So I'm just talking about it without writing it down. And I feel like if each one of us who has this bipolar label that feels there's something more to it than just this reasonable explanation of a chemical imbalance in the brain, it's the same people that might have had faith and then they're thinking, well, this doesn't quite seem true to me anymore. What else is there? And so I feel that a lot of us might have this within ourselves, that where we feel this isn't quite the whole truth. Maybe it's a little bit of the truth, but it's not the whole truth, and it definitely doesn't explain all of these experiences. So, anyways, and I think that's all I'll talk about this for now, and I'll talk about it more later, because yesterday I came across a tweet, and I read the article. It was very short, and I want to talk about it after. And then I was reading a bit of the comments, and this woman was talking about some of the things that happen in a brain that is bipolar. And she was talking about it in terms of, this means it's a brain illness, because look at what's happening in the brain during these phases. And I see it as, hey, that it's actually talking about some of the ways the brain mutates during the process. I don't see it as, oh my gosh, my brain's breaking down. I see it as, holy crap, this is brain metamorphosis. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. For now, I have to go.